Imagine this. One random day you wake up and realize you were transported in an H-type anime. Those lucky moments like tripping on nothing then. Bruh. How? How is that even possible? So yeah, you'll experience all of that. But not really. Why? Because you're one of those annoying side characters who's friends with the main heroine. You see your friend for some reason get girls without even trying while you're just there. A pervert with negative aura. You're a loser. The girls hate you. You get zero. Why do they even exist? I love Delta. Anyways, that's going to happen to this guy who we'll be looking at today. And before starting, this is the name of this manga. A game called Magical Explorer, or MagiX for short, is a student life game with exploring dungeons and gaining levels. You can be whatever you want in this game, a warrior, alchemist, or a blacksmith. And most of all, it's an H game. He always enjoys playing it and was happy. I'm surprised this guy seems built and looks like the type that would steal your girl in every NTR. And not some fat guy that would steal your girl in every NTR. He went to bed as usual, but in the morning, he woke up and see that he looks different. He checks himself. Then looks at his reflection again, then recognized that the character is named Takioto, who's from MagiX. He started pinching himself to confirm he's not dreaming. After that, he observes his surrounding and see that it's not too different from the real world. He then walks outside and see that there are people with different races with their pets. He smiles as he confirms that he really is in the world of MagiX. He then thinks for a moment, then realizes he can also meet the female heroines of this game. He thinks of the characters that can be rizzed in the game and also the characters he likes but can't be pursued. And since he's also in an H game, that means he'd also be able to touch someone accidentally and would not be reported as, then realizes something. He's just a support character. And those wow things only happens to the main protagonist. The protagonist will have everything. He would be prioritized and become overpowered. And especially in H games. Just 1 ounce of kindness and the girls would instantly want to make babies with him. He'd even get away with everything, like accidentally see them in a very vulnerable position and they'd just smile at him. On the other hand, other males in the H game won't get any of the action. With one simple reason. People would hate if the girls would be interested in other guys. In some games there is even no other male characters. And he himself also understands it. He cried once and jumped in a forum when one of the female heroines touched hands with some other dude. Takioto then slumped down, realizing he's just the side character in some other guy's harem H story. He again looked at himself in the mirror. Then tries to remember what was Takioto's role in the game. Takioto Kusuki. He's just the funny guy that's friends with the protagonist. He's just the typical helpful guy, who for some reason he's smart and gives out information to the protagonist. But the downsides of him is that he's always very. I love big ones and small ones. Can I ask you guys sizes? The female heroines hates him for his indecent behavior and always beat him up for his actions. And in the game he's not that strong. The girls, and especially the main protagonist, would become very OP, making him useless. Plus, why let a guy into your harem? He himself always kicks him out when he played the game. He then puts the harem stuff aside and thinks about his future life, since it's far more important. He went down in the living room, then sees the passing exam and the pamphlet for the academy. He then reads the congratulatory note. Then got hyped, since this stuff was never in the game or even in the bonus content or the anime bundle. He was happy being reincarnated, since it's materials that he have never seen before. He then realizes that it's 2 weeks until the entrance ceremony, which is the start of the game. Takioto then thinks about the school that he'll be attending. Tsukuyami Magic Academy. As usual, it's a very super best elite supreme first class high society first class school. He's happy that he'd be attending the best magic school. Then freezes, as he realized that this world has magic. Takioto is a character who can use magic by default. But the problem is that he doesn't know how to activate it. There's no keyboards he can touch. He then went back to his room to check if there's some guides. But the first thing that he sees in his messy table is his exams with failing grades. He takes a look at them and asks how did this guy even pass the entrance exam to that elite academy. He even checked his notes to only see doodles. But checking his recent notes, he saw that it became normal, and observes that it's very detailed. He checks the book area, then discovers his diary. He opens it up, then got surprised at what he wrote. A year ago his parents were deceased. He doesn't know any relatives from her mother's side. So he went and lived with her grandmother from his father's side. But now his only relative, which is her grandmother, is currently hospitalized and her condition is getting worse. He never knew that Takioto had a rough life. He then got a flashback of whenever the heroines talk about family, he always becomes sad. He puts back the diary and realizes that Takioto has a sad backstory. After that, he saw a magic book in the table. He picks it up and sees that it's a super beginner book on how to use magic. He then sat down and engrossed himself in studying the whole book. After that, he puts down the curtains, then stands in the middle of his room. He then closes his eyes and tries to activate his magic. He concentrated and started to form something on his hand. He says light. Then celebrated because he can use magic. He can even deactivate and activate it at will. It might be the most basic spell, but he's still happy since it's something that's different from the other world. He's also hyped up because there are a lot of magic types. Attack magic, defense magic, restoration magic, support, and even indecent magic. Plus, Takioto is a character who actually has the most magical power in this game. He thinks to himself that if he'll work hard, he'd be at least become somewhat in the mid to lower high support character. And with that, he might also be able to challenge more dungeons. In the game, there is only 10 dungeons which you can teleport to. But now that he's inside the game, there's more than just 10 dungeons. But in the game, Takioto would slowly struggle in the dungeons the further he goes down because of the plot, making him an unplayable character, eventually becoming replaced. Then realized that he has knowledge of this game. He knows all the cheat items and the best skills to get in this game. And with him being Takioto, who has vast amount of magical power and his game knowledge, he's confident he can attain even higher. And might actually become the strongest. But knows that becoming the strongest would be a difficult task. The heroines are exceptionally strong. They possess official cheats that was implemented by the developers. And on top of that, the protagonist named Hijiri Iori would become strong to the point that he'll even solo the Demon Lord, which is the final boss. But he still smiles and loudly shouts that screw the plot, screw the main character, and screw his harem of girls that he can't screw. He's going to become the strongest and travel around the world and visit the amazing places he saw in this game, and is excited for the first day in school in the next 2 weeks, but freezes because he has no money. And after reading the diary, it's clear that Takioto is struggling with a lot of things. After that, someone rang the doorbell. He runs towards it and asks who might be the person he's going to meet. And as he opens the door, he saw Mommy Wow Wow Wow, the principal of the Tsukuyami Magic Academy named Hanamura Marino. Takioto got surprised since she's one of the characters in Meiji X and is standing right in front of him. He wonders why the principal of the academy of all people would come and visit him. The principal then asks if he's Takeyotakusuki, and asks him if he wanted to have a meal together. Okay, time for chapter 2. We then get an explanation on who she is. Her name is Hanamura Marino, the leader of the magical world, as well as the principal of the academy. She's basically the hot OP MILF you can't get. Sad. She's the OP character that sometimes appears in front of the protagonist to give helpful advice. He is still stunned as to why such an important character is standing in front of him. And seeing him being quiet, Marino apologizes. She thinks he's surprised by an unknown person coming to meet him. She bows her head and formally introduces herself. But Takioto stops her from finishing and to lift her head since he knows her very well. Normally in real life, you shouldn't just jump in on an invitation from someone you've never met. But since this is Meiji X, an H game, he might get lucky and would get an accidental touch or feel. He then finishes changing and comes back to the living room thanking the principal for waiting. She compliments him in his getup. And with that they head out. Marino then apologizes to Takioto-kun because she can only make reservations in this poor low-class store. But Takioto is stunned to see that they're in a very fancy restaurant and asks how is this considered a lower class. Takioto assures her that it's a wonderful location. Then sees the food that is worth 4 houses and a kidney. He cut the meat and starts to take it in. And got surprised at the first bite. Marino notices that he's doing the Food Wars thing, thankfully without the exploding clothes. Then cries as he describes that it's the kind of taste that a poor plebeian like himself would never be able to experience. Marino laughs at his interesting review on the food. Then cuts the meat and takes a bite too. And seeing this, he got turned on looking at her putting the meat in her mouth. She did the girl sound and says that it is very delicious. He thinks that Marino really acts childish too sometimes, which makes her cute. Marino really is one of those hot older waifus who's clearly better than the inferior female heroines. And back then, when he realized that Marino-san is a character you can't conquer, he wrote to the customer service about it and begged that she'd be added to an additional content DLC, but it never happened. But he's very happy right now because he can now watch her every move. Marino noticing his wide grin and manly giggling. She asks if there's something in her face. He apologizes and realized he was acting creepily towards her. Then hopes he won't get a restraining order. Because right now she's a real person and not just a 2D character. He formally apologizes for staring and reasons out that it's because she's someone very famous. She tells her it's fine, then Marino gently touched his hands. Seeing Takioto becoming nervous, she tells him to calm down since they're already plenty acquainted. He then questions as to why they actually already know each other, but can't concentrate because of her big front milker's very big wow. And thinks that it's happening. It's happening. I love older women. Marino then pouts because Takioto isn't answering her. Takioto came back to his senses, jumps back and apologizes for imagining such things. She then grabs his hand again and just said straight to him. He is now her child. He wants her to become his mommy, but not like this. And worst of all, they're actually related by blood. Turns out Marino and Takioto's mom are cousins. She apologizes for just recently hearing about the tragedies that had fell upon him. And she also apologizes for not consulting him before adopting him because she wanted to save him as quickly as possible. He thanks Marino and thinks that she's as kind as she was in the game. Marino then says that he should move into her home now since she's now her mommy. He got surprised by that. Mainly because in the game, Takioto and the protagonist lived in the same dorm and not to mention in the same room. Marino says that it's just her and her daughter living together, so they have a lot of rooms available. Plus her daughter also agreed, so he shouldn't worry about anything. Takioto then remembers her daughter and loudly says her name, which is Hatsumi-san. Marino got surprised he already know her name. Takioto reasons that she's pretty famous as well. He then recalls who she is. Hanamura Hatsumi, the only daughter of Marino-san. She's a teacher in the academy. And in the game, she's the teacher that often gives skills to the protagonist. He smiles because this living with Mommy Marino and hot Hatsumi Wani-san route wasn't in the game and wants to experience it. Then he thought about the plot. Should he destroy the plot or follow it and go live in the dorm just like in the game? If he would change the plot now, all the flags and scenarios he knows might greatly change. But he also thinks about the everyday life he'll have with Marino and Hatsumi. Marino seeing that he's thinking deeply, she apologizes for moving things too fast for him. She pulls out a dormitory registry and tells him that he can also just live in a dormitory if he's uncomfortable with the idea. But she still asks him to live with them for a while to see if he wants to stay with them. Takioto agrees with her proposal. And with him agreeing, Marino pulls out her phone and asks for his number so she can come get him if he'll be done packing his belongings. Takioto hesitates for a moment and tells her that he actually doesn't have a phone. He was looking for it everywhere, but he couldn't find it. Marino then remembers something and started crying. She apologizes because she heard that he received a phone call from his parents seconds before the monsters took their life. and she apologizes for bringing up such a traumatic memory. Meanwhile, Takioto got surprised about more lore drops. He then now knows the reason why Takioto never answers the protagonist calls and chats. And that also explains why he's always hostile towards demons. Takioto was always weirdly energetic at times and realized he was actually only trying to hide his sad backstory. He felt sorry for the old Takioto and tells him that he promises he'd make him become even greater. He assures Marino-san and tells her that he's fine now and isn't scared anymore. And to prove it, he asks to hold her phone. He again tells Marino-san that he really is fine now. Marino smiled brightly. And Takioto, seeing her like that, also smiled back. Marino then grabs Takioto and tells him that they should go and buy a phone for him then, as a present for joining the family. We then see them shopping. Marino then picked the best smartphone they currently have, with Takioto telling her that it's so expensive. And with that, their date, or should I say their mother and son bonding, have ended. Marino says she would have loved to stay with him longer, but she has a business trip now. But Takioto says he had a lot of fun today and tells her to do her best. And since he said he wants to stay further in her grandma's place for a week before moving in with them, she gave him his living expenses that should be sufficient enough for 1 week. But as he opened the envelope, he sees it's a full stack of cash. Seeing Takioto's reaction, she asks if it's not enough and asks if he wants to take her card. But Takioto assures her that it's more than enough, it's even enough to buy a middle-class home. She then tells him to always contact her whenever, even if it's just a slight problem. Takioto again thanks Marino-san as the car moves away. He then can't believe that Takioto is actually a relative of the Hanamura family. Since the Hanamura family is a very influential family in the magical, political, and industrial world. He then looks at the money Marino gave him and says that it's a waste to use all of this money for living expenses, and instead, he should use the money to make himself stronger. All the knowledge he had by playing the game or going through forums and wiki, he can now use it as an advantage, which makes him excited. He has 2 weeks before the Real story begins. After that, there will be a lot of different events that will start, and he's going to take everything to make himself stronger. And so, with the money he has and a week before moving in with Mommy, he decides to check his own strength first. And that's the end of chapter 2. I decided to cover 2 chapters because the story is kinda slow, but still entertaining. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to get notified if the next chapter comes out. Until then, bye-bye.